You probably had a moment today where you were alone. Maybe it was in the bathroom. Maybe it was sitting in your car before going inside somewhere. Maybe it was just a few minutes between one thing and the next. And in that moment, without even thinking about it, you reached for your phone. But here is the thing. That reflex, that automatic, almost panicked reach for stimulation the second you are by yourself, is one of the strangest behaviors any human being has ever performed. And the reason it feels so normal is because you have never asked what being alone actually meant for most of human history. The answer is far stranger than you think. For nearly 300,000 years, your ancestors were alone all the time. Not in the modern sense, not alone in an apartment with Wi-Fi and delivery food and background television. Truly alone, separated from the group, in silence, in the dark, with nothing but the sound of their own breathing and whatever their mind chose to do next. And what their minds chose to do is something researchers are only beginning to understand. Psychologist Matthew Killingsworth at Harvard ran a study in 2010 tracking the real-time thoughts of thousands of people throughout their day. He found something striking. People's minds wandered away from what they were doing nearly half the time, 47%. And when minds wandered, people reported being less happy, regardless of what they were thinking about. His conclusion was simple. The wandering mind is an unhappy mind. But Killingsworth was studying modern people. People who had been trained, since childhood, to always have something to do, somewhere to look, something to consume. His data told us what happens when a domesticated mind is left without its leash. It said nothing about what the original mind, the one that evolved before screens, before books, before language even became sophisticated, what that mind actually did in silence. Archaeologist Ian Morley at Oxford has spent years studying the cognitive life of early humans, specifically what they might have experienced in altered or solitary states. His work points to something unexpected. The human mind, when genuinely left alone with no external input, does not collapse into anxiety. It begins to generate. It creates. Early humans, separated from the group, whether by night watch, by hunting, by illness, or by choice, were not sitting in the dark panicking about their productivity. They were almost certainly doing something that neuroscientists now call default mode network activation. Your brain has two major operating states. There is the task-positive network, which fires when you are focused on something external, a problem, a screen, another person. And there is the default mode network, which activates when you stop doing that. For a long time, scientists thought the default mode network was just the brain idling, background noise, a screensaver. They were wrong. Neuroscientist Marcus Reichel at Washington University in St. Louis discovered in the early 2000s that the default mode network is not resting at all. It is intensely active. It is the part of your brain that runs when you imagine the future, when you replay the past, when you think about other people, their intentions, their emotions, their inner worlds, when you construct a sense of who you are. The default mode network is, essentially, the engine of your inner life, and your ancestors ran it constantly. Think about what the life of an early human actually looked like. Groups of 20 to 50 individuals moving across landscapes, sleeping in shifts, gathering and hunting in patterns that left enormous stretches of time that were not filled with structured activity. No entertainment, no deadlines, no meetings, just time. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar at Oxford, famous for his work on social group sizes in primates, has written extensively about the mental demands of early human social life. His central argument is that the human brain expanded dramatically not to solve tool-making problems, but to manage relationships, to track who was friends with whom, who owed whom, who could be trusted, who was dangerous. And how do you practice that when no one else is around? You run simulations in your head. You replay conversations. You imagine future encounters. You rehearse what you will say, what they might do, how you will respond. You build and rebuild mental models of the people around you, testing them against memory, refining them, updating them. That is what your default mode network was built to do, and for most of human history, time alone was when it ran at full power. Here is something almost no one tells you. Early humans almost certainly spent significant time alone doing something else that has been largely lost in modern life. They stared, not at screens, not at pages, not at anything in particular. They sat and looked at the fire. They watched the sky. They let their eyes rest on the middle distance, and they went somewhere inside themselves that had no name and no destination. Researchers who study indigenous communities that still live close to ancestral patterns have documented this. Anthropologist Edward Schiefelin, who spent years with the Bosavi people of Papua New Guinea, described long stretches of what he called productive stillness, men and women sitting in near silence, apparently doing nothing, and yet emerging from those periods with renewed clarity, with ideas, with emotional resolution. This was not laziness. This was not boredom. This was the original human interface with solitude, and it was treated as normal, necessary, even sacred. The word boredom itself did not exist in English until the 19th century. Before industrialization, before the clock became the organizing principle of human life, there was no cultural concept of time that was wasted by not being filled. Time alone was not empty time. It was different time, interior time. Psychologist Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire has studied boredom extensively and found something counterintuitive. Boredom, genuine, unrelieved, unstimulated boredom, dramatically increases creativity. When her research participants were forced to do nothing or to perform an extremely dull, repetitive task, their performance on creative tasks afterwards spiked. The brain, denied external input, turns inward and starts making connections. It starts building. Your ancestors did not have the option of filling every quiet moment with stimulation. So their brains learned to use those moments, learned to treat silence not as a problem to be solved, but as a resource to be used. That is what solitude originally was. Not loneliness, not isolation, not absence. It was input of a different kind. And somewhere in the architecture of your brain, that is still what silence is trying to be. Every time you are alone, every time you resist the reflex to reach for your phone, something in your neural wiring that is hundreds of thousands of years old is waiting to activate. It is waiting to run the simulations, to replay and rehearse, to imagine and construct, to stare at the fire, whatever your fire is, and let the connections come together in the dark. You will probably never sit alone in a forest for 3 days without distraction. That experience has been designed out of modern life almost completely, but the capacity for it has not been designed out of you. The default mode network is still there. It is still waiting for its turn, and every moment you give it, every deliberate, uncomfortable, unstimulated moment, it is doing something your phone cannot do. It is building you. Ancient humans did not fear being alone with their minds. They were their minds. And in the silence, in the dark, in the long unstructured hours that modern life has almost entirely eliminated, that is exactly where the most human thing about them lived. Tonight, when you have a moment between one thing and the next, and you feel that reflex to reach for something, just notice it, because that reflex is new, and what it is trying to silence is very, very old.